Hello everybody, my name is Todd. I am a developer at the Washington Post. You may have heard of us. We have been in the news recently.
You are the news recently.
No comment about why. More specifically, I work on the ARC suite of tools, which are tools for newspapers and broadcasters and whatnot. So I'm here to talk to you about clean code, and specifically clean code in JavaScript. It is conceivable, and I would argue even desirable. Why should you care? The basic question we always should ask. There's this canonical Martin Fowler quote, any fool can write code that a computer can understand. Good programmers write code that humans can understand. It's always good to put a Martin Fowler quote in your talks. It gives you instant credibility. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I also like to sometimes say considerate code. I like to think that you want to write code that is considerate of the next person who's going to work on it, even if just selfishly that person is probably going to be you. Don't leave a mess for yourself. And then learn things that last. There's a blog I like a lot called Farnham Street. This guy is Shane Parrish. And he had a blog post about make sure you learn things that last, that stand the test of time. And he gave a kind of a good analogy of like news, right? We're always, and I work for a newspaper, so it's ironic that I'm saying this, but news is ephemeral. News today is not going to be news tomorrow or in a year. And the point is, you want to learn things that have lasting value. And so for programmers, we want to learn things that will last throughout our career. You know, we're going to learn the new technologies. We have to. It's part of what we do. We'll learn the new framework. You know, ironically, I gave a talk 2 months ago on GraphQL, so I'm not above this. But things like writing quality, clean code can last you your entire career. So what is clean code? This is what most people think the definition is. The code I write is clean. The code you all write is garbage. Not I'm sure anybody in here. That is not the actual definition of clean code. So some folks have actually tried to codify this, most famously in the sort of seminal book, Clean Code, written by this guy, Robert C. Martin, also colloquially known as Uncle Bob. He is actually a local guy. I believe he's Northwest, like Gurnee, and does stuff in Chicago, speaks all over the world. This book really was an attempt to take things that he had learned over his 40-plus year career and things that his team had learned. It was influenced by Kent Beck, Ron Jeffries, Martin Fowler, some of the real giants in our industry. And it was really a way to look at it and say, what are the things over this collective years of programming, what are the things that have worked well and what are the things that haven't worked well? And sometimes these things come off as being somewhat ideological. A few months ago, there was sort of a political blow up by some people who don't like Uncle Bob's politics. To me, that's an ad hominem. It's silly. The answer to should you write better code isn't, I don't like your politics. It's like, yeah, maybe we should write better code, or maybe we should listen to what these people who've been doing this for a long time say. One of my favorite quotes is this is from the book. Clean code always looks like it was written by someone who cares. And last week I was browsing Reddit, and I think it was r/mildly satisfying or oddly satisfying, and there was this picture of this network closet, and clearly the person who had done this took a lot of care and painstakingly put this together. And as an analogy to code, right, this would be something that would be really nice to work on. This is obviously very well organized, although plot twist, it's probably not connected to anything. So what are some things that we would say are typical of clean code? I'm not going to drill on all of these, and these slides should be available in the meetup. Some I want to highlight: expresses intent. This is very, very important. I think we've all had a situation where we've worked on code and we had no earthly idea what it was doing. Does what you'd expect is also really important, right? So if there's a get user function and we go into it and it's setting credentials and it's doing a whole bunch of other stuff that's not getting a user, that's not code that's doing what we'd expect it to do. Solid is something, if you're not familiar with it, I would highly recommend looking into. I'm not going to have time to go into. And the last thing I'll highlight is testable and tested. The JavaScript testing community is really maturing. I highly, highly recommend getting a good testing strategy. I'm a big fan of unit testing. So about a year ago, Ryan Florence, React guru, one of the guys behind React Router and React Training, is now doing his own thing, posted this code on Twitter and said, somebody tell me why this code isn't good, clean code. Well, Ryan, I'm about to tell you. So here's a couple things that are wrong with this code. A, there's no, I don't know if this was in a larger function or what. This is just what he posted. But here we've got conditionals, nested in conditionals, nested in conditionals with ternaries. And so, I don't know, maybe Joe, maybe React expert could look at this and quickly see. I still have no idea what it's really doing.
React code looks exactly like that.
Is that right?
Well, there's some pretty simple white space rules and indentation here that would make this a lot more readable.
Right.
But
The other nice thing that you could do is instead of putting comments, you could put those things in functions and they'd be sort of like self-documenting. But let's not have that discussion right now. So, so I would argue this is not the cleanest of code, right? We've got to look in all of these ternaries, and then some end up ending out here with a null, and then another one that ends out in a null. I would argue that it's not very clean code, which leads us to functions. So this is also out of the book. Functions should do one thing. They should do it well. They should do it only. The idea being that functions should be very small because functions that do a lot of things can be very difficult to reason about. And also functions can be a really nice way for you to organize your code. Just as I like cars, right? I work on cars sometimes. And it's nice to have, instead of having my tools like all thrown in a bin and I have to search through them every time, it's nice to have like a tool chest, big tool chest. And it's organized and labeled. And if I need to find my impact sockets, I can go find them very quickly. The same holds true with code. It'd be nice if we could just go to code, and if I need to find some code, I can go straight to it. So I'm not going to have a lot of time, so let me give you an example. So this is actually straight out of the talk I gave 2 months ago on GraphQL. So this is a file that's not particularly clean because I just dumped all of my resolvers in it. So let's do some things. Originally I was going to, so we've got a post, we've got posts. What I'd prefer to do if I was going to make this cleaner, sorry, I know it's going to look dark, but I think it's about as best we can do. Is that better? Better for everybody? Good. So I've got this big comments function, and I got all these other functions, and I think it would probably be better if I wanted to clean this up was to move these out into separate files, and then maybe I could take the things that are common between them and move those into modules to sort of dry out the code. So we've got this big comments function, and I actually had some fetch options that I moved out. That was going to be part of the talk, but to save time, I moved those out. So I've got some fetch options, and I need to export those. Fetch options, post fetch options. Again, some people are going to look at this and say, hey, this code's not going to run. It probably won't. That's not the point of this, is to get it to run. The point of it is to show you how to clean this up a little bit. So let's also look at this. Okay, we've got some like duplicate code here. Let's pull that out. Anytime you can delete code, that's generally a good thing. That's going to reduce some of the cognitive overhead going forward. So now we've got, so there's a couple of responsibilities that this function is doing, right? First, it's going out, it's getting some data. Then once it gets the data, it's filtering it, and then it's checking if there's this limit variable is truthy, and then if it is, then we do some more stuff. So, and then we've got it wrapped in a try-catch, right? Because async await means try-catch. And so if there's some kind of error thrown, it'll run down to the catch. So one thing we could do is, and this is, again, this is a trivial example. There are many, many much larger functions out there in the world, but let's do this. So we would take this code, especially because it'd probably be reusable. I'd actually probably, we might have like a handle error module that we'd move this out to. Let's move that here to handle error. It's going to take an error. All right. So now this function just got a little bit smaller, and any of those details just got abstracted to a separate function. And then we've got this kind of whole block of code here that's doing a bunch of stuff. I'd like to put that in a separate function. I already have that. And then, but here's another thing. Has anybody gone into maybe a file and seen a bunch of functions, and they seem to be sort of randomly spread out, right? Not a lot of fun. There's something called the step-down rule, where your functions are close to where they're called. So comments by post ID, and then we pass the post ID and the limit, right? And so now, as we read the function, hey, this is the first one that's called. We just go down here. That's the second one that's called. Handle layer is down there. We might even do, again, this may seem a little pedantic to some. We might even have like a separate function again. This might be something we'd even move to a separate file where we do a make async request. I might actually want to write this like it should be written. I know Joe loves async await.
And the function keyword.
You don't like the function keyword?
He's a hater. He's just a hater.
It's a
Man. Right, and then we return our response data. Right, and so now our functions are getting much, much smaller, and they're getting closer to only doing one thing. Early on in my clean code, 10 minutes. Early on in my clean code career, I got a little crazy with this and started doing a whole bunch of one-line functions, and then that way can be madness too, because you end up like just jumping around between all these one-line functions. That, if you can and it makes sense, sometimes it's a good idea. But this is just a very, very quick way, because I had 4 minutes to do this, to sort of show you, like all of those little bits of code now are wrapped in a function that the function tells you what the code is doing. So you don't have to guess, you don't have to spend 10 minutes. Why is this important? Oh yeah, one other thing I want to point out. Chris Powers is also a local guy who did a great talk at Groupon about these things. Chris Powers does things for Uncle Bob's Clean Coders series. Yeah, so the thing I wanted to say, why does this matter? This second point, right? So you don't get points for having small function names, or for having small names or clever names, right? You get points for communicating clearly, and those points are in less lost productivity, less cognitive overhead in terms of going to the code and trying to figure it out. If I have code that is overly complicated and every time someone goes to it, they have to spend 20 minutes just trying to figure out what it's doing, that's 20 minutes lost. If I section things out, name them clearly, and there's a good flow, and it cuts that time, then we've got a much more productive team. So TLDL, too long, didn't listen. Keep your functions small. They should only do one thing as much as they can. And the last bit is test. I'm a big fan of testing. Testing often helps you manage change, and more importantly, it helps you write cleaner code. Not necessarily, you could still write ugly code that's tested, but you're probably much more likely to write cleaner code. Some further resources. Ryan McDermott, who's a Google engineer, did a repo called Clean Code JavaScript that distills some of this, but I highly recommend you go to the book first. Or if you start here, definitely go to the book. And that's it.
Are you going to post all of that on the meetup so that we can all see this?
I will.
So that we can all get to those links?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll put the slides in the meetup, and then I can even put the repo. I put the repo previously on the meetup, but I'll add it again. What do we have, 2-3 minutes, Mark?
Yes, you do.
Questions? All right.
Oh,
I was gonna
Chris.
say, so, and I don't know if this is the case. Have you come across a situation where because you're breaking up a chunk of code into like multiple functions and going in further and further and further, and like you said, at one point you like had like a line each.
Yeah.
Have you ever had like a performance issue where it turns out it ends up running through so much extra code necessarily?
No. I mean, if you think about it, how quickly it is for a computer to call a function, it doesn't add performance overhead. I have broken things by overly breaking up functions. Often that is aided by having unit tests, right? One of the real arguments for having unit tests is how do you know if it's broken if you don't have tests? You can go into the UI and check it, but sometimes you still miss stuff. If you have code that's literally checking all of your functions and checking your lines, and you break something, you know right away. It also speeds up the feedback loop. But in terms of performance, I don't think that's an issue.
Are there any static analysis tools you endorse for JavaScript?
Static analysis tools, like what for other languages?
Like Lint?
Yeah, I like ESLint a lot. It can be a pain, but you can always change the rules. I know at the Post we use standard, which I have some issues with sometimes, but I think ESLint is great. There is some argument now too about don't worry about it, just let Prettier do it. And I know we're gonna have a talk on Prettier later. Shout out to Prettier.
Nice.
But yeah, I think ESLint is really good.
TypeScript.
And TypeScript and Flow can be very nice.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and can comments.
Are we at a time mark?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yeah, and can putting useful comments clean, sort of make it code clean since it tells you what's going on.
Rarely. So clean code advocates for not doing comments, and often what you do in a comment is something that you could abstract out to a function. And I've even had times where I took a comment and turned it into a function name. And it ended up being, because the problem is, when you go to read code, you're going to read code. All of a sudden you have all these comments in there and it just adds noise to the file. But there are certainly some there are times when a good JS doc or times where some good comments can be really helpful. It's just that oftentimes we lean on them too much, and then there's all the memes about comments, right? And there's the old joke that a comment over time becomes a lie. So I think I'm out of time, so I don't want to.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.